Part 1. The new neighbors Ethan and Lily Parker had lived in Maple Creek for 6 quiet years. Their house was small but warm, with a white porch and a maple tree that turned golden every fall. Life between them was steady and kind, full of understanding but missing something they couldn't name. They loved each other, yet routine had settled deep into their days. Ethan worked as an architect, often lost in plans and deadlines. Lily, who ran a small home bakery, spent her afternoons surrounded by sugar and soft music. Their evenings had become predictable dinner. A movie, a few quiet words, then sleep. It wasn't unhappy, just ordinary. One sunny Saturday morning, Lily heard the rumble of a moving truck next door. She stepped outside, curious. A young couple stood by the driveway, waving at the neighbors. The woman, Sophie, had a bright smile and wavy blonde hair that caught the sunlight. Her husband, Mark, was tall and calm, with eyes that made people feel instantly comfortable. They looked like the kind of couple who carried adventure in their laughter. When Sophie spotted Lily, she waved enthusiastically. "Hi, we're moving in next door," she called out. Lily smiled back, happy to finally have neighbors after months of the house sitting empty. Within minutes, they were talking over the fence. Sophie was full of life, telling stories about their recent travels across California and how they wanted a quiet town to start fresh. Mark joined in, his voice steady and friendly. "We've been on the road too long," he said. "We just want to plant roots somewhere peaceful." Lily felt drawn to them instantly, their warmth, their energy. When Ethan came outside to help with the gardening, Sophie introduced them all. Soon, the two couples were chatting like old friends. That evening, Lily and Ethan invited them over for lemonade on the porch. The sun dipped low behind the trees, painting the sky with orange and pink. They talked about everything: work, travel, books, even dreams they hadn't told anyone else. Sophie spoke with such passion that Lily found herself smiling more than she had in weeks. Ethan noticed it too. It had been a long time since he'd seen his wife light up like that. Mark and Sophie were newlyweds, married just a year. And their affection for each other was gentle but visible in every small gesture. Days turned into weeks, and the friendship grew naturally. The two couples started spending more time together, sharing meals, helping with house projects, walking in the evenings. Sophie would often drop by Lily's kitchen, helping her bake or simply talking about life. She had this way of asking questions that made people open up. "How long have you two been married?" she'd ask, genuinely interested. When Lily told her, Sophie's face softened. 6 years. That's amazing. You still seem so close. I hope Mark and I are like that." Lily smiled, but inside, her heart ached a little. Were they really that close? She hadn't thought about it in a while. Ethan was kind and dependable, but somewhere between daily routines and quiet dinners, the excitement had faded. Yet when she looked at Sophie and Mark so new, so eager, she felt something stir again. Maybe it wasn't too late to feel that way once more. One Friday evening, Sophie and Mark invited them over for dinner. Their house, though still half-furnished, already felt full of life. Soft jazz played in the background, candles flickered on the table, and laughter filled the room. Sophie was an amazing storyteller. She could make even a simple road trip sound like an adventure. Ethan and Lily found themselves captivated, drawn into the warmth of the moment. After dinner, they all sat outside on the patio. The night was cool, stars faintly visible above. They talked about love, what kept it alive, what made it fade. Mark said quietly, "I think real love is when two people choose each other every day, even when it's not exciting." Lily nodded, surprised by how much his words mirrored her own unspoken thoughts. Sophie turned to Ethan and Lily, her tone thoughtful. "You two seem to understand something we're still trying to figure out. You're calm, steady, connected. We'd love to learn from that." The air went quiet for a moment. Lily didn't know what to say. She wasn't sure she and Ethan were anything special. But when she looked at him, sitting beside her under the soft light, she saw something she had forgotten: the quiet comfort of someone who had stayed through every ordinary day. The next few days, that comment stayed with Lily. Every time she saw Sophie and Mark, she thought about it. What did they see in her and Ethan that felt worth learning? Maybe love, when seen from the outside, looked stronger than it felt from within. Or maybe she and Ethan had simply stopped noticing what they still had. One evening, after Sophie and Mark came over for coffee, Lily found herself standing by the window long after they left. Ethan came up behind her, resting a hand on her shoulder. "They're good people," he said softly. She nodded. "They are. It's nice having them around." She paused, then added, "Do you think we were ever like them?" Ethan smiled faintly. "Probably. We just got comfortable. That's all. Comfortable." That word lingered in her mind long after he went to bed. A few nights later, Sophie stopped by alone. She looked different, tired, but thoughtful. She leaned against the doorway and said, "Lily, can I tell you something? Watching you two, it gives me hope. You're calm in a way I can't explain. Mark and I are still figuring things out, and sometimes we fight because we care so much. But you and Ethan, you're like a quiet reminder that love can last." Lily felt her chest tighten. "It's not always easy," she admitted. "Sometimes love feels less like fireworks and more like staying in the rain until the storm passes." Sophie smiled, her eyes soft. "Maybe that's what we're trying to learn." That night, Lily told Ethan about the conversation. He listened quietly, then said, "Maybe we've been teaching each other too, without knowing." From then on, their friendship deepened. The Parkers found themselves laughing more, reaching for each other's hands again, doing little things they'd stopped doing years ago. And all the while, Sophie and Mark watched with quiet admiration, as if trying to capture something invisible between them. But none of them knew that the connection they had built would soon lead to a moment that would test their understanding of love, trust, and what it truly meant to be seen. Because the night Sophie said, "We'd love to learn from you," was just the beginning of something none of them expected. End of part 1, fast-paced, emotional, romantic, YouTube-safe storytelling tone. Written for a mature but clean audience. Part 2. The evening of curiosity. The air in Maple Creek felt different that evening. The sun was setting behind the houses, painting the sky in soft pink and gold, when Ethan and Lily received a text from Sophie. "Dinner at our place tonight. Something special planned." There was a small heart emoji at the end, something Sophie often used without thinking much. Lily smiled when she read it, but felt a strange flutter in her chest, a mix of curiosity and nervousness. When they arrived, Sophie greeted them with a warm hug, her excitement glowing. Mark was in the kitchen, finishing up the last touches of dinner. The house smelled of roasted herbs and fresh bread. Soft instrumental music played in the background, and candles flickered on the table. It felt cozy yet strangely intimate, as if something meaningful was about to happen. As they sat down, conversation flowed easily. Sophie talked about their honeymoon in Arizona. Mark shared a few funny stories from his college days. And Ethan responded with his dry sense of humor that made everyone laugh. But beneath all the laughter, there was a subtle quietness in the air, like they all knew the night held something unspoken after dinner. Sophie brought out dessert chocolate cake that looked like something from a cafe window. She placed it on the table and looked at Ethan and Lily with a gentle smile. "You two have this connection," she said softly. "It's so natural. The way you talk, the way you listen to each other, it's beautiful." Lily blushed, caught off guard. Ethan chuckled and said, "We've just known each other a long time. You learn to read between the lines." But Sophie didn't laugh. Her eyes were thoughtful. "That's what we're trying to learn," she said. "How to stay close even when things get quiet." She hesitated before adding, "Would you mind showing us how you do that? How you keep the closeness alive?" Lily blinked. "Show you?" she asked, confused. Sophie nodded, her tone still soft, not intrusive. "Just talk to each other like you always do. Let us watch how you share things, how you connect. We're still learning what lasting love looks like." There was a long pause. Ethan and Lily exchanged glances. It sounded odd, maybe even too personal, but there was no strange energy in the room. Sophie's voice had sincerity, not curiosity for gossip. but longing to understand. Lily hesitated, then smiled politely. Well, we can do that, but it's really nothing special. Mark and Sophie sat across the table, quietly watching as Ethan and Lily began to talk. They started with small stories about how they first met. How nervous Ethan had been on their first date. How Lily once burned dinner, but he ate it anyway. Their voices carried warmth and familiarity. At one point, Ethan looked at Lily and said, "You've always been patient with me, even when I don't deserve it." Lily smiled and replied, "That's what love is saying when things get messy." As they spoke, the room seemed to soften. Sophie leaned forward, resting her chin on her hands, her eyes glistening. Mark reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. It wasn't about romance or attraction, it was about understanding something deep and real. Something both couples had been searching for in their own way. Hours passed without anyone noticing. The four of them sat there sharing stories, memories, laughter, and quiet moments. At one point, Sophie whispered, "You two remind me that love doesn't have to be loud to be strong." When the night grew late, Ethan offered to help clean up, but Sophie shook her head. "No, just stay," she said with a smile. "This night is special." So they stayed. The lights dimmed and the conversation shifted to deeper things, fears, dreams, and moments that had almost broken them. Lily spoke about the year she lost her mother, how Ethan had held her for hours without saying a word. Mark shared how he sometimes struggled to balance his work with his marriage. Sophie admitted that she often feared losing connection too soon. That love might fade if she didn't protect it. Lily told her softly, "Love isn't fragile. It just needs attention. You don't protect it by worrying, you protect it by being present." Sophie nodded, her eyes full of gratitude. It wasn't about one couple teaching another anymore. It was about four people learning from each other, seeing themselves reflected in one another's hearts. There were no lessons, no speeches, just the quiet realization that love takes many forms, sometimes soft, sometimes heavy, but always real. Later, when they stepped outside for some fresh air, the moonlight spilled across the backyard. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of jasmine. Sophie looked at the sky and said quietly, "Do you ever feel like love changes shape? Like it becomes something else over time?" Ethan replied, "It has to. That's how it stays alive." Lily added, "The trick is learning to fall in love with the new version, not the old one." Sophie smiled at that. "That's beautiful," she whispered. By the time they said their goodbyes, it was well past midnight. Mark hugged Ethan, and Sophie hugged Lily tightly, her voice trembling slightly as she said, "Thank you for tonight. You don't know how much it meant." Lily didn't fully understand, but she felt it too, that strange, deep warmth that only comes when people truly connect. Back home, Ethan and Lily changed into comfortable clothes and sat on their bed, still wide awake. "That was different," Ethan said finally. Lily nodded, brushing her hair behind her ear. "It was," she said softly, "but it made me think about us." Ethan looked at her, curious. "What about us?" Lily smiled faintly. "Maybe we've stopped noticing how much we've already built. Tonight reminded me of that." Ethan took her hand. "You think they'll be okay?" "I think so," she said. "They're still learning, just like we are." They sat in silence for a while, holding hands, the soft hum of the night outside their window. Neither of them knew how deeply that dinner would linger in their lives. It wasn't just a meal, it was a mirror, showing them both how love evolves, how connection deepens, and how sometimes strangers can remind you of what you almost forgot to cherish the next morning. Lily found a note slipped under their door. It was from Sophie. The handwriting was neat and full of emotion. "Thank you for showing us what real love looks like. You didn't just let us watch, Hugh, let us feel it. We'll never forget it." Lily stood there reading it again and again. She smiled and placed the note on the kitchen counter where Ethan could see it. That evening, as they watered the garden, Sophie and Mark waved from their porch. Their smiles warm but softer now, more grounded. There was something different in the way they stood together, closer, more at peace. And for the first time in a long while, Lily felt a calm happiness in her chest. Not the kind that came from excitement or surprise, but from a quiet knowing that love, when shared, even in the simplest way, had the power to change people. What began as an unusual dinner had turned into something neither couple expected, a moment of honesty that brought them all closer, and a lesson that would stay long after the candles had burned out. That night, as Lily turned off the lights and whispered goodnight, she didn't realize that Sophie and Mark would carry that moment in their hearts forever, and that something even more unexpected was waiting just around the corner. End of part 2, fast-paced, emotional, mature, and fully compliant with YouTube's monetization and content standards. Part 3, the lesson we didn't expect the morning after that unforgettable dinner. The Parkers' house was filled with quiet sunlight. Lily stood by the window, sipping her coffee, when she noticed Sophie walking up the path with a calm smile. She looked different, peaceful, as if something inside her had finally settled. When Lily opened the door, Sophie said softly, "Can I come in?" They sat at the kitchen table, the smell of fresh coffee between them. Sophie looked thoughtful. "I just wanted to thank you," she began. "Last night changed something for us. Mark and I talked until morning. We realized how much we've been rushing, trying to make our love look perfect instead of letting it grow naturally." Lily smiled. "It's not easy, is it?" she said. "You think love should always feel exciting, but real love? It's more like a rhythm. You just have to find your beat again." Sophie nodded, tears glinting in her eyes. "That's exactly it. Watching you and EthanHowe.com, how real you both are, it reminded me what love is supposed to be about." Before leaving, Sophie hugged her tightly. "Thank you for letting us learn from you. You have no idea how much that meant." That small conversation stayed in Lily's heart all day. When Ethan came home, she told him what Sophie had said. He smiled, quietly proud but humble. "I guess we were all learning something," he said. "Them from us, and us from them." In the days that followed, the two couples saw each other often. There was an ease between them now, a sense of quiet understanding. Mark and Sophie seemed lighter, happier. They started taking morning walks together, hand in hand, and Ethan and Lily found themselves doing the same. Sometimes they would all meet at the park and share coffee, talking about work, life, and dreams that still waited for them. One evening, Sophie invited them over again, this time just for tea. The atmosphere was relaxed, filled with laughter and music. But as the night went on, the conversation grew more honest. Mark spoke first, his voice soft. "You know, we thought love was something we had to perform. Always smiling, always in sync. But it's not. It's in the quiet moments, the ones no one sees." Ethan nodded. "That's where it lives," he said. "In the small, everyday choices." Sophie looked at Lily with deep affection. "You two helped us see that. Thank you for letting us in. We'll never forget it." Lily smiled but said nothing. She didn't want to make it heavy, but inside she felt something shift, a sense of connection that went beyond friendship. It wasn't romantic. It was human. For people, different lives, but joined by one truth: love takes courage. Months passed, and life returned to its steady rhythm. The friendship between the couples became part of their routine. They celebrated birthdays, helped each other with house repairs, and often gathered for Sunday dinners. Lily and Sophie grew especially close. They shared their fears, their hopes, and their mistakes without judgment. One rainy evening, Lily found herself sitting on the couch, staring at the raindrops sliding down the glass. Ethan came in, drying his hair with a towel. "You okay?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "Just thinking," she said, "about how strange life is. How meeting them somehow brought us closer again." He sat beside her and wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "Sometimes," he said quietly, "people walk into your life not to stay forever, but to remind you what you already have." She leaned against him. "Do you think that's what they were meant to do?" Ethan smiled. "Maybe. Or maybe it was just time for all of us to wake up a little." Their lives kept weaving together in small, beautiful ways. When Sophie's art gallery finally opened, Ethan and Lily were there in the front row, cheering her on. When Ethan received an award at work, Mark and Sophie brought champagne and laughter. The friendship wasn't about grand gestures. It was about showing up over and over, no matter what. Then one day, unexpectedly, Sophie and Mark announced they were moving. Mark had been offered a job in Seattle, and it was too good to pass up. The news came with mixed feelings, joy for them, but sadness too. On their last night in Maple Creek, the four of them gathered one final time at the Parkers' house. The living room lights were dim, the air filled with warmth and quiet emotion. Sophie looked around, her eyes shining. "This house," she said softly, "it's where we learned how to be a team. You two changed the way we see love." Lily shook her head. "We didn't change you. You just found your way." Mark smiled. "Maybe, but you reminded us what matters." There was a long silence after that, the kind that holds more emotion than words ever could. Then Ethan raised his glass. "Two good neighbors," he said, his voice steady but full of feeling, "and two lessons that come when we least expect them." They all clinked their glasses and laughed through the tears that followed. The goodbye that night was full of hugs, promises to visit, and quiet gratitude. As the door closed behind them for the last time, Lily stood for a while in the empty hallway, feeling both sad and thankful. Later, she found the note Sophie had left on the kitchen counter. It read, "You showed us love in its truest form, not by words, but by the way you live. Thank you for letting us see it up close." Lily pressed the note to her chest and smiled. The next morning, the neighborhood felt quieter without them. But something inside Ethan and Lily had changed for good. They began to live more intentionally, leaving notes for each other, taking small trips, laughing over coffee again. It wasn't a dramatic change. It was gentle, steady, and real, sometimes. When Lily stood on the porch watching the sunset, she thought about Sophie and Mark in their new city. Wondering if they still took evening walks together? She liked to believe they did, because some lessons stay with you no matter where you go. Months later, a postcard arrived. It was from Seattle. On the front was a picture of the ocean at dusk. The message on the back was short. "We still talk about that night. You taught us to listen more, to love softer. We're happier than ever. Thank you." Lily showed it to Ethan, and they both smiled. No grand story, no dramatic ending, just quiet lives touched by understanding. That evening, they sat outside again, watching the sky fade into twilight. Ethan took Lily's hand and said, "Funny how everything started just because they moved in next door." Lily nodded, her eyes gentle. "Maybe some people come into your life not to change it, but to remind you it's already beautiful." He kissed her forehead and whispered, "Then I guess they did their job." And as the first stars appeared above Maple Creek, the Parkers sat together in the calm silence of their porch, the same place where it had all begun. Their hearts were lighter, their love quieter, but stronger than ever. They didn't know if they would ever see Sophie and Mark again, but it didn't matter. What mattered was the truth they had all found. Love doesn't always arrive in fireworks or grand gestures. It often hides in small moments, soft words, and the simple act of staying. And that was the most beautiful lesson of all. End of part 3, fast-paced. Emotional, heartfelt, romantic, yet fully clean and compliant with YouTube monetization and community guidelines.